Welcome to I'm Your Target Demographic and welcome to What is Wednesday. Today we are covering Dungeons & Dragons, which is something a lot of you probably know about, but maybe you've never played, maybe you've never done it. So here's some insight into what is Dungeons & Dragons. Back in 1974, the first iteration of Dungeons & Dragons was published. This was the dawn of the modern role-playing game. One player, called a Dungeon Master, or DM for short, coordinated the adventure for a group of players. Unlike video games and even other board games, Dungeons & Dragons didn't have much, or sometimes any, visual aids, so it was up to the Dungeon Master to tell the story. What was happening, who was involved, what does my character see?
Everything is kind of sloped and cramped together.
Okay.
The buildings are very tightly clustered, and often you have to walk up long flights of winding steps to get to where you need to go.
This DM either can create this adventure themselves, which is a lengthy and difficult process your first time, or they can purchase books and campaigns that come pre-packaged, which tell them all about the adventure that they're going to lead, what sort of enemies to throw at your adventurers, and much, much more. These books are great for beginning adventurers and DMs, and they come with everything you need to play. I also want to specify that D&D is not about the DM versus the adventurers, but rather imagine they are the ones that coordinate the adventure and they control the enemies, but it's not the DM's goal to win. It's the Dungeon Master's goal to tell a great story and to make sure everyone is having fun.
Oh, I don't have a character. I'm the Dungeon Master. I control the game and act out all the characters you meet along the way.
And Daniel, watch out for him. He's sneaky.
Yeah, he thinks being the Dungeon Master gives him the license to mess with our heads.
Oh, I'm sorry. Perhaps I should let you encounter kittens and grandmas so as not to upset you.
Now, I've been mentioning the adventurers, so let's dive into that. The group of people actually playing the game are each controlling a character, either that they've chosen from some pre-designed choices or that they've created themselves. Just like the Dungeon Master has a book, or more specifically books, so do the players. If I'm new to D&D, I might choose a character that is pre-designed. That means I don't need to worry about the more complicated parts of creating a character. If you want a more comprehensive experience, you can use these player handbooks. You'll find a race that you want, such as an elf or a human, and then you find a class that your character would be, which would be something like a thief or a warrior. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, as there are many classes and subclasses within the traditional umbrellas of things like thieves and warriors. Now you might think that isn't that complicated, but after you choose your race and class, you then need to pick certain skills that you're good at, which are given you based on your other decisions. As a warrior, do you focus on skills that deal damage or skills that protect your party? You pick the specific skills that you have access to. The books give you info on what those skills do in terms of the game and how to do them. We'll get into gameplay in a second. When creating a character, you also pick stats for your character, things like intelligence and strength. If your warrior has a lot of skills that rely on their strength number, you'd want this to be a high number. The books tell you how many points you have and how you can distribute them.
So what do I do? First, you have to create a character. Roll your dice and find out what your ability scores are.
What are those?
Oh, well, that tells you if you're strong or smart or how good you are with a weapon.
You also create a background for your character now that you know what they're like in the game. This really only impacts the story, but it gives your character motivation. Maybe your wizard is best at ice magic, and you decide that their parents were killed by a fire monster, so it motivates your hero to find and best that villain. The Dungeon Master might find inspiration from your backstory, and maybe they find ways to introduce this villain into your story.
All right, fine. I'll be a dwarf. But my name is Carlos.
Carlos the dwarf?
Yeah, you got a problem with that, Gorthon?
Okay, so you have a Dungeon Master that has a cool story to tell, and you have a group of people ready to play. There are different versions of Dungeons & Dragons from the past 40 years, so the gameplay might be different depending on which version your friends are playing. Some have very tangible props, such as grids and models to represent your battlefield. Some of the pre-packaged adventures come with grids that are cool to look at, helping to set the scene. And some versions of the game are much more informal and conversational. How close am I? Someone might ask, instead of referencing a grid. The Dungeon Master would just paint a word picture of the scenario instead.
You approach what looks to be the only true sign of life in your vicinity, this small hovel, and the door slowly opens with a creak.
After they set up the story, they would often give the players clues as to how to proceed. Experienced players go along with the story because they know that that's where they're supposed to go. Inexperienced players might try to do something completely off the path, and therefore make the DM's prep work all for nothing.
How do you begin your adventure?
I want to get some bitches. We're the club at Isildur, yeah?
Tyrell, this is highly unusual. I think the guys probably just want to go on the quest that we've already...
Stephen?
Yes?
I'd like to join Kanye the Giant in his quest.
In the game, players just say what they want to do and the DM continues the story. If they want to do something that might be difficult, the DM might ask them to do a check.
I'm gonna stealth check and open it. 12.
This is awkward. You straight up bust into the scene.
That is why those stat numbers are important, as they allow your character to do things that make sense for them. A strong warrior would be the one to kick down a door, not the wizard, because the warrior will have a much better chance. I won't burden you with the math, but the DM usually has a chart of what sort of dice rolls would be required and what sort of modifiers to keep track of. Now again, the DM is there to make sure everyone's having fun, not to blatantly kill their characters off. So it's a balancing act of making sure that the journey is difficult yet not impossible. Often the DM has a screen or a board to protect their dice rolls, so they may even lie about the dice results in order to serve the story and to keep the adventure going. Some DMs might decide to be truly transparent and honest, while others put the story first and want the flexibility that a little bit of fibbing might give them. So your adventurers go on a journey, coming across monsters and all sorts of evil things. How you tackle these problems is up to your group. A character with high charisma might talk their way out of a conflict, while others might charge in. You have skills, weapons, accessories, all sorts of things that allow you to do special things in the moment. The DM should always encourage creativity and allow the players to use interesting means to solve these problems. And after all these adventures are over, characters can level up, meaning that they gain more stat points and potentially new skills and abilities. Leveling up also means that your enemies will be more difficult as well, and that's the basic gist. Now let's look at the cultural impact of D&D. Back when Dungeons & Dragons was still relatively unknown, it gained a reputation for being satanic, mostly due to aggressive campaigning by Christian organizations. For a while after, the game removed references to demons and witches, things like that, until about 1997, when a company called Wizards of the Coast bought the rights to Dungeons & Dragons. Wizards of the Coast already owned Magic the Gathering, which featured many of the same types of demons and monsters, so they began to reintroduce them into D&D. Now, when you walk into a store and see the massive display of role-playing games, most of them owe their existence to Dungeons & Dragons. It was the first game to really focus on using 20-sided dice, using numerical stats for characters, and it was one of the first to popularize the Dungeon Master role, which is now almost universal among role-playing games. The game has also become much more mainstream, though many people still don't understand the rules. There are popular podcasts and YouTube channels that feature role-playing games. If you want a notable starting point, for any of you that might be interested in hearing how this all plays out, check out a podcast called The Adventure Zone, where three brothers and their father, who's never played D&D before, dive headfirst into an adventure. It's a comedy podcast, so it'll have you laughing, even if you don't understand or care about the rules behind the scenes. If you're interested in D&D but don't have anyone to play with, The Adventure Zone is just one of many D&D venues that's pretty easy for newcomers to dive into. Many celebrities have also come out as players of Dungeons & Dragons, including Stephen Colbert and Vin Diesel, who's been making the rounds lately playing D&D on a few popular sites.
Would it be worth a Mystic Blast?
Certainly, if you want to. Go for it.
Director and actor Jon Favreau even credited D&D for his imagination and his ability to tell stories. In terms of licensing, there's been a fair amount of Dungeons & Dragons movies and television shows, though none of them have really been successful. There are also a lot of video games set in various D&D worlds, though those also have a very hit or miss reputation. As of right now, we're technically in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, though again, people will still play other versions, especially if they've invested in books and campaigns for that version. If you're interested, you can either look up a starter kit that you can use with your friends, or you can find local shops and groups that might be interested in letting a new player in. Some campaigns and stories can last for years, so don't be offended if they don't want to let a new player in, as explaining some of the rules can be quite timely.
Hey, this is really fun.
Maybe just browse YouTube and podcasts and try to find some adventures that you can listen to and see if that scratches the itch for you. So let me know in the comments if you've ever played D&D. What did you think? Was it fun? Was it not your thing? Are you interested but don't have anyone to play with? Do you have other podcasts or YouTube channels that you listen to that might be cool for people that are interested in this? And as always, let me know in the comments what other facets of nerd culture you want me to dive into. Make sure you subscribe, like, all that jazz. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
It is I, Carlos the Dwarf. The dragon has been slain, and you're free to rule your kingdom.